Warning, the following video may contain sequences which some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
If I were to ask you what you value most in a relationship, what would you say? Would it be loyalty? Or maybe love? How about trust? Or chemistry? What about honesty? I'm sure mostly everyone would agree that if you were to have a healthy relationship, honesty would be vital. After all, any relationship built on lies would easily fall apart when one partner finds out they've been lied to, especially if that partner trusted their significant other. I wanted to start with this because in our case today, dishonesty will be somewhat of an underlying factor in the events that occurred. But before we even get into that, I want to ask you one more thing. Let's paint a picture. Say you happen to meet someone you really hit it off with. You're extremely compatible with each other, you make each other happy, and everything is just going as well as it possibly could. Sounds wonderful, right? But what if this person that you thought you were really falling for turned out to be not who you thought they were? Not like they live a completely different life, or they were faking their personality. Rather, they were not upfront with you about something pivotal, their gender. How would you react? Our case today starts on Tinder, believe it or not. I'm sure most of us know what Tinder is, but for those of us who don't, Tinder is one of the world's largest dating apps. Millions of single people download the app in hope of finding love, or a quick hookup, or something along those lines. This is what the man in question was doing. Etute, an 18-year-old Virginia Tech freshman linebacker. As many do, he was casually browsing on Tinder. And this is where he met Angie. Iceman and Angie hit it off. They were talking and soon one thing led to another and Iceman was now in front of Angie's apartment. Why? They had agreed to meet, and Angie was to perform oral sex on Iceman. But something was off about this entire thing. Iceman stated that when he entered, it was completely dark, and Angie was hiding her face. He didn't think too much of it though. Perhaps since he was already in the mood, he didn't question many of the things he should have. Nevertheless, they continued on with what they intended to do, and Angie performed oral sex on Iceman. Afterwards, Angie apparently gave him $50, maybe paying him back for a good time, or to help with the travel costs for him coming over to her house. A nice gesture, many would say. After this encounter, however, Iceman stopped messaging Angie. But why? Things seem to be going well, right? Well, no. It's because he finally started to ask himself questions about what happened that evening. Why was her house completely dark? Why didn't she want me to see her? During the time Iceman stopped messaging Angie, it would appear that she tried to keep herself entertained. She reached out to another person on Tinder. However, the person she reached out to happened to be a friend of Iceman. After she did this, she reached out to Etute himself and invited him over once more, telling him to bring some friends along this time so they can have even more fun. The more the merrier, as the phrase goes. However, Iceman was still questioning Angie's gender. So he went to her apartment again, along with two of his friends. When he arrived, once again, it was dark. Though barely visible, Angie was still donning clothing similar to before. He told his friends to wait outside as he followed her to his bedroom. He had no intentions of performing anything sexual. Instead, he took out his phone and pointed his flashlight on Angie. Once he did, he saw that Angie was definitely not who she said she was. He had groped her to see if she was truly male or female. And much to his shock and disgust, Angie was a male. So how did our young 18-year-old decide to handle this deception? She started punching and punching and punching until Angie was no longer standing, but was laid out flat on the floor. Eisenman stated he may have also kicked Smith on the way out. Shortly after, surveillance cameras of that apartment complex showed the three men running out of the building. The ones who made the discovery was Smith's brother and nephew, because they had not heard from him in a while, and naturally they got worried. When they arrived at the apartment and went up to his bedroom, they were greeted by his lifeless body, laid out across the floor, and immediately called 911. When the police arrived, they started collecting evidence around the scene. They found blood splattered on the walls, and bloody shoe prints in many areas of the house. Something interesting to note is that they found a knife between Jerry's mattress and bed frame. Possibly there for protection in case of anything going wrong. A certain family member of Mr. Jerry Smith commented that she hopes Eisenman spends the rest of his life in jail. Other family members confronted the Etute family after the hearing, saying, "Justice for Jerry," saying that Jerry did not deserve to die. Jerry's family stated he was the kindest man around, and that he would be very open about him being a homosexual. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Though we cannot talk about Jerry's personality, we can deduce from his actions that he was trying to deceive Eisenman. Why else would he go through that entire charade to keep his true identity hidden? Every time he invited Etute over, he would always make sure it was dark. Too dark to properly make out who was performing anything on him. And besides that, by making Eisenman believe that he would be coming over so they can have some sort of sexual intercourse, it would almost dispel any questions that one would ask immediately. Sometimes when men are focused on something sexual, they tend to ask questions later, and that's exactly what happened on the pair's first encounter. Eisenman asked questions only after the fact. Was the situation strange when he walked in? Of course it was, but he didn't ask questions because he was focused on one thing, which was probably the way Smith intended for things to happen. Now, do not get me wrong. I am by no means blaming the victim. What Eisenman did to Jerry was not, and will not ever be okay. He murdered him by beating him to death with his fists. That is a crime, and justice needs to be served for that. However, I cannot say Jerry is completely clean in this entire scenario either. Had Jerry from the start told Etute that he was a homosexual man, then more than likely Eisenman would have not engaged in any sort of sexual interaction with him. Because I think we can all be certain that Etute is not gay. But Smith did not do that. Instead, he led Eisenman to believe he was a female. Performed sexual acts on him in the dark, in a situation that was designed to have him not question anything and just go with the flow. When you do something like that, you are putting yourself at risk. Why? When it comes to sexual orientations, people tend to think strongly on it. If someone is gay and you force them to be with a member of the opposite sex, they will find the entire encounter unpleasant, and would more than likely retaliate in some way. Like trying to push the person off by any means necessary, shoving, hitting, anything that gets the person away from you basically. The feeling is the same for a person who is straight. A heterosexual individual would obviously not want to do anything sexual with someone that is of the same gender they are. So when you actively and knowingly deceive someone to believing that you are of the opposite gender but you are not, when the one who is heterosexual discovers the lie, you can expect them to be angry, and you can also expect them to retaliate. How they retaliate would differ from individual to individual. However, retaliation is almost a guaranteed result from pulling off a stunt like that. Obviously, Eisenman handled the situation terribly. He let his anger take over, and just took it all out on the object of his anger, and that resulted in the death of a man. But you can understand why he acted out in that way. This is why it is important to be upfront in any relationship, especially with online dating. You don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know how they would react to having their sexuality questioned. And if you are of a different sexual orientation, You cannot by any means just expect them to change their orientation to suit yours. You can't just expect someone to be okay with being tricked like that. I would never say that Jerry deserved to die, but what Jerry did led to his death. That is something you should never do to someone, because again, you don't know how they will react. Always be honest in your relationships, whether you are heterosexual, homosexual, transgender. Be honest. Had Jerry been honest from the start, this entire situation could have been avoided, and he would still be alive today. This is a sad case that honestly could have been avoided. However, the lessons we can draw from this really boils down to the need to be honest in relationships. Online more so, because as stated earlier, you do not know who you are dealing with. And this warning should be especially heeded by LGBTQ+ members. It's no secret that not everyone in the world is accepting of sexual orientations other than heterosexuality, so it is therefore important to say something before you engage in any activity. Of course, it might mean that someone you may be interested in loses any desire to go further than a conversation with you. But really, is your life not more important than a one-night stand or a potential relationship with someone you're just starting to know? I'm sure most if not all of us would pick our life. So let's all take this case as a warning example. Be honest and upfront. There's no guarantee that it will end perfectly, but any ending is better than your life ending.